Good afternoon. Thank you so much for investing your time today with us to listen to our panel discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are some of the most important popular topics of the 21st century, as more companies than ever recognize the role they play in forging an equal society. Our goal today is that whatever your role is, that you will come away with something, a new idea, a fresh perspective, maybe a strategy that you can apply in the organization you work for or even in your daily life. Today we have with us an amazing panel of speakers. So right now I would like to welcome Amir Kabel, Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Burberry, Jerry Daykin, Senior Media Director EMEA at GlaxoSmithKline and Global Diversity and Inclusion Ambassador at the World Federation of Advertisers, and last but definitely not least, Angelika Tzemou, a member of the Board of Directors and Head of HR at Bayer Hellas. Welcome, all of you, all three of you. And without further ado, I would like to start with Amir. Welcome, Amir. Diversity is an extremely important in today's business world. How do you foster culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Burberry?
Thank you so much for the question. And firstly, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on with great panelists. For me, diversity and inclusion has moved beyond a nice to have. For me, it's an important business priority that companies need to take seriously as the profits they make, as supply chain or any other business strategy they have in place. Because we know and we have seen over the last 10 to 15 years, diversity yields rewards. We know there's a direct correlation between diversity, equity, and inclusion and profitability of an organization, innovation, creativity, talent development, but more importantly, engaging your employee population to make sure you take it seriously, because now there are 5 different generations in one organization. So how is an organization tackling diversity? Isn't a nice to have, it's an absolute critical work that needs to be done in any organization. I think to your point around cultural change, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's not a project. It's not something that has a start and an end date. It's a cultural transformation piece. We need to make sure any organization we go into, diversity is included and threaded throughout the organization. But one thing I will say is, how are you making that change? And change often happens on 3 levels. The first is organizational. So think of your policies that you're creating. What policies do you have in place? How inclusive they are. The second change happens in functional or teams. What kind of team dynamics do you have and what kind of team culture do you want to create? And then the third change is individual. What are you going to do differently tomorrow? And the reason why I say these 3 levels of change is because often people think change is a policy, but change happens on a macro level and a micro level. And if you want true cultural change in diversity and inclusion, you have to tackle both and you have to get that right in balance.
Thank you, Amir. Jerry, Amir gave us the outline of the strategy. I mean, right now I would like to ask you, a change starts at the top and we need agents of positive change, so at leadership level. So how can we persuade our CEOs or our leaders or the top management teams about the importance of acting behind DI, both internally and externally?
Yeah, I think I work in our marketing team, and in marketing, it's fascinating for me because actually, I think it's definitely our job as marketers to embrace D&I. It's our job to understand consumers. It's our job to talk to them, to have relatable messages, and I think it's baked into the DNA of what we should be doing as marketers. But of course, it doesn't always come naturally, and it can easily get lost out in our processes. I loved how in the introduction you said this session was really about inspiring everyone that they have a role in this. And I think that's absolutely true. So myself personally, I technically run our Europe, Middle East and Africa media team. But I was just very vocal on this topic internally. I would speak up on our intranet. I would speak up at meetings. I would ask if we could have speakers in and things. And our CMO, Tamara, just said, love your enthusiasm, Jerry. Please help me run a global project to drive this across our business. And I think there's always opportunities for people to put your hands up, to tell your boss, to tell your colleagues that this is something you want to help champion within your business. And there are often projects, whether they're employee resource groups, whether they're diversity councils, whether they're things that you can help create and drive yourself. But yes, it's also been possible in my business because our CEO cares and talks about it, because the top of our business down really cares about it. And I think that happens in a couple of ways, but ultimately it has to come by being tied back to business. Our senior leaders have a tough job, and that job is to keep the shareholders happy, keep the business ticking over. I think EMEA made some great points that actually diversity is a business imperative. There's lots of really good research out there showing that more diverse businesses work better. They deliver better results if you're hearing different opinions, different perspectives. And there's evidence that happens in marketing too, that more progressive advertising can perform better. And I think if you don't have that story, if you don't have that narrative in your business, I think look at how you can bring it in, look at the outside evidence that's out there, but also start tracking and measuring and showing it. But I think a lot of our senior leaders do believe in this. They see that increasingly shareholders and investors are asking for this. So I like to think we're getting a bit beyond why and more into how. And I think that's where everyone in the organization can really play a role.
Thank you, Jerry. Talking about commitments, I would go now to Angelika. Buyers has expressed its commitment to DEI. Could you please share with us the main pillars of your DEI approach? How do you overcome the internal barriers, reaction challenges that you had to deal with?
Thank you, Dimitris. Bayer has indeed publicly committed to fostering and cultivating a culture of inclusion and diversity. We want to see diverse perspectives, experiences, lifestyles together to create a work environment based on respect where everyone can thrive. Because by now we know people are at their best when they can bring their whole selves to work and when they are truly valued for what they bring to the table. So it's a major milestone and commitment from a global company like Bayer with over 100,000 employees in 83 countries. More specifically, by 2025, we aspire to establish a 50-50 gender balance as an average across management levels. Currently, it's around 40-60, as expected, 40% being women. So our goal of gender parity in management is also in line with our commitments to the UN Women's Empowerment Principles and the G20 Empower Pledge. And we also wish to increase the proportion of people with disabilities in the workforce to more than 5% by 2030. So I think we all agree ambitious goals because we are truly serious about it. We really want to create a work environment where gender, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or physical ability do not matter because they shouldn't matter. And there are so many activities we currently do. Our inclusion and diversity strategy focuses on 4 pillars. So it's culture, talent, business, and brand. So you can clearly see that the intent here is to make an inclusive, to take an inclusive lens to both our people and our business processes in a way that makes inclusion, it solidifies it as a day-to-day activity. But let's be clear, diversity and inclusion are not the same. Diversity is easier to measure. It's about numbers and KPIs. Inclusion is about impact, how people are involved, to which extent they feel recognized. And companies can mandate diversity, but they have to work a lot harder to cultivate inclusion. And Jerry mentioned the business resource groups. We also have at Bayer business resource groups that play a vital part on our inclusion efforts. For example, we have a blend resource group for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. We have a resource group for people with diverse abilities, another one for advocating women's advancement. And all these are voluntary, company-sponsored groups of employees who are fully involved. And they work together to promote this awareness. But Dimitris, you also asked me about overcoming challenges. So our BOM has definitely committed and it's accountable for very ambitious objectives here. I think we all agree. But creating the inclusive and diverse environment is everyone's responsibility. Me, as an individual, how do I confront my unconscious bias when I approach others? Am I accountable for my behavior? Am I willing to speak in English, for example, here and be more inclusive to Jerry and Amir? So one of the most common barriers to inclusion and diversity is unconscious bias. We all have them. They may be formed by our upbringing or family values, our culture, or even education. It's not good or bad, but we need to recognize them, that we have them. And that's the way we become more open to raise questions to ourselves. So at Bayer Hellas, all employees have gone through a training in understanding unconscious bias. It starts with all of us individually, how we want to contribute to this changing environment. And discussing all these topics openly is what is raising awareness in the organization. We are not there yet. Surely we have a lot of work to do, but the journey has started.
Thank you, Angelika. I'm coming back to Amir. I mean, Burberry is one of the most recognizable brands and companies in the fashion industry. We all know that. But how is the fashion industry ecosystem contributing to this, to build this DEI agenda? And what are those alliances that, as an industry, you had to build in order to achieve your goal?
Great question. And I asked the same question when I started my role 2 years ago. The first question I asked was, who works with who? What ecosystem is already in place? What benchmarks are there when it comes to diversity and inclusion? We see there's so many benchmarks around sustainability. We have the UNDP, we have the Sustainability Index, we have the Dow Jones, etc. But when I was looking for a diversity standard or an index, I couldn't seem to find one. And then I started to realize that alliances and making sure that we're all working together, because actually, ultimately, we all want to create a culture of inclusion. So we need to make sure we work together to get there. And for me, partnerships are critical to get to your D&I journey. Why? Because partnerships will help you with things that you may not know. You don't know what you don't know. And these partnerships will raise awareness, provide you with education, share any sounding board advice, but also help you go on that critical journey of DEI. For example, I currently chair the Diversity and Inclusion Steering Committee for the British Fashion Council. So when we look at that, my job is to make sure that the industry in the fashion world is making sure that they're taking the right approaches and creating a change that doesn't take years and years to do, but accelerates the change that we want to see. But also, where do we want to see change? Organizations, in education, in society, because often they are quite interlinked. And for me, the ecosystem is equally as important when we are talking about diversity in organizations, when from all the way around in a holistic approach. Ultimately, we're talking about being more conscious about our choices that we make in an organization. Who are we partnering with? What do we want to see out of those partnerships? And partnerships are going to be so critical when you go on the journey with you. And for me, lastly, is accessibility, because often accessibility will help you drive that change in terms of diversity and inclusion. But more importantly, who gets access to what? And partnerships will help you access those people, maybe underprivileged school kids, whatever the situation is, to make sure that you have a diverse talent pipeline. And for that, alliances and partnerships are the most critical thing in the D&I journey.
Thank you, Amir. Talking about alliances, the WFA has done an amazing job promoting the DEI agenda. I mean, we've seen so many things you have done, including the guidelines and the guidebook we have published, which is it's an amazing effort. So, Jerry, what about the human rights? How do you think we are at a good level to protect the human rights? I mean, what about marketing, the companies? Are we doing our best in order to protect the human rights? I'm talking about China, but overall.
It's a big question. And when I started my career in marketing, I definitely didn't think I'd be asked questions about human rights. But actually, just yesterday, I was on a call with a doctor from the UN Human Rights Council, and that tells you how seriously global society is taking this issue. I think absolutely, for the most part globally, there have been really substantial improvements. I mean, things are far from perfect, far from perfect, especially in some countries and some parts of the world. But overall, and I definitely think over the last couple of years, the increased focus, the increased discourse, the conversation we're having around this topic, it's not just about talking, but certainly talking is a good part of that. I think it has moved things forward. I think you can still find plenty of communities in different countries around the world who do not feel they have their human rights, who do not have their human rights. And so the work continues. And that can be very small things to do with access, to do with equality, or can be really big things to do with law, the right to freedom, the right to be themselves. So it's definitely not a done journey. And there are some areas where, unfortunately, things seem to be going in a slightly bad direction. I think we've seen over the last year or two a lot of hate speech, misinformation, online platforms, which have a really great positive side, but can sometimes be used for really negative things as well. And I think as a business community, as marketers, as people who play a role in that system, we need to keep holding that accountable. And I always think diversity and inclusion is a very interesting topic to discuss on a global stage, because it means something very, very different in different markets. And I'm based in the UK. In my region, we also have Saudi Arabia, we have South Africa, we have Norway. You can probably imagine we have Greece. You can probably imagine there are some quite different realities, quite different conversations, different levels of ethnicity within that market, different tolerances of LGBTQ. And I think that's why, although it's really important for us, and on behalf of the World Federation of Advertisers, I'm really thankful you've invited us to talk here in English. Sorry, my Greek is not very good. But at the same time, we absolutely recognise you need local solutions, and we hope we can inspire and create frameworks and push people in the right direction. But you're going to have to find something that works for your colleagues, for your consumers, for what's right in your market. And that's wonderful, because countries are diverse and different, and we should celebrate that. So great progress, but absolutely, even in developed countries like ours, there is still lots to be done, and lots of people who don't have equal access and equal inclusion, and let's hope we can get there.
You're absolutely right, Jay. We should celebrate that. Angelika, I have a question for you. How do we ensure authenticity and truthfulness? I mean, you are a distinguished member of our HR community here in Greece. How do we convince our stakeholders that our intentions are sincere and true? How can you do that? Tell us.
Well, we live in a world with increasing complexity business, and the data is already there. So diverse companies drive innovation. They can solve complex problems better and outperform the business competition. I think Jerry mentioned that earlier. A diverse working environment can help a company perform between 25 and 35% better than the norm. I think this is impressive. So we are also seeing more diverse customer needs and greater needs for corporations to be responsible corporate citizens. So these unique needs and experiences and diverse skill sets ultimately are about leveraging the diversity of thought that can solve complex problems. So stakeholders are convinced when you speak the business language. A diverse and inclusive company is a healthier and growing company. So this means that it can create more employment and development opportunities for everybody. This is a business and social imperative for citizens to sustain, as we've heard by so many voices today. So you asked me about authenticity. Authenticity is ensured when you bring diversity and inclusion in the very heart of leadership. Leaders need to walk the talk, to listen intentionally, to be empathetic and respectful of others, to open up about their own emotions and struggles. How often do we listen to stories like this? To be willing to understand others so that everyone is enabled to bring their whole self to work. So there is no magic wand for cultivating diversity or inclusion. I think we are setting clear goals, and this allows us to see this seriously. I'm a firm believer that change happens one step at a time and one act at a time. And the journey has started, as I said earlier, and several steps and acts have taken place. And I have to say, I'm pretty optimistic about this journey building a better future.
We are very optimistic. After this session, I think we will be more optimistic. So this is right before the end. I mean, so let's give a message to our audience here, the virtual one and the physical one. I mean, where do we go next? What do we have to do in order to promote the DEI agenda in a better way? What has to be done? You are experts here, so your view really matters to us. Amir, let's start from you.
Sure. I'm going to be quite provocative here. So the World Economic Forum said to achieve true gender equality, it's going to take over 200 years. I think it's 217 years. So my question is, as a country, as a company, whatever level you want to focus on, how are we okay with that? How far and how quick do we want to move to achieve true equality, and not just around gender, but in all dimensions of diversity? I guess what next for me is, I think Angelika mentioned it, diversity and inclusion are very separate. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, focus on these three areas, but focus on them equally, because if you focus on one, you often neglect the other. And just a couple of more points. What are you focusing on? Gender equality? Race equality, disability? How you put yourself out there is equally as important when you talk about inclusion for all. And the last couple of points is, let's stop talking less and let's do more action. Actions speak louder. Let's walk the talk rather than just talk the talk and no change happens. And lastly, who's accountable? Accountability is key, because when you put accountability in anything that we do around DEI, you will see results. You can't just say we're going to do it, but there's no accountability on leadership in the organization as individuals, because accountability is what's going to change, and that's what's going to happen in order for us to make that change happen.
Jerry, what do you think?
Yeah, I think probably two messages. One, to the kind of the CEOs and the senior business leaders who've joined us today. I think, you know, the pressure is really on you folks to lead this, to show what this means in your organization, to make it clear to everyone who works for you that this is important. And if you don't do that, I think your business will have a real chance of being left behind, that consumers will start challenging it, that your colleagues will start wanting to work elsewhere where they can see this happening. And I know I speak to quite a few senior business leaders who are very nervous about this, who don't know how to have these conversations, who, you know, many senior people in business, myself included, we come from a lot of privilege. We don't know how to talk about people outside of that box. So surround yourself with some of those people, whether they're colleagues within your company, whether they're partners and advisory people you can reach out to. But don't be afraid of saying the wrong thing. If you're trying to make a positive change, I think you'll find people will come on that journey with you. And if you're not a senior leader and perhaps you feel less empowered to drive that change in your business, as we said at the start, absolutely there are things that all of us can do in all of our jobs, whether we work in HR, whether we work in marketing, whether we work in any environment. There are small steps we can make to make our slice of our company more inclusive, whether that's being really careful when we're hiring and interviewing people, whether that's thinking about our daily lives of kind of what can I do to make sure that the environment I'm creating in my office is inclusive, is friendly, is welcoming. And you don't have to start by changing your entire business. Just start by thinking, is there one small thing I could do with my colleagues, with my team, that would make things better and more inclusive for them? So senior leaders, please drive the force forwards, and all of us, let's take those small steps together.
Thank you, Jerry. Angelika, some final words from your side?
Well, I can only echo what Jerry and Amir shared already. We have to be intentional at what we do. The culture journey starts with me, not with you. It starts with all of us individually. So how am I potentially contributing to the environment I live in? Am I open-minded and willing to understand better the others around me? Am I willing to accept others for what they truly are? And what can I do differently? So being open-minded, curious, and recognizing that we don't know everything about people's lives, I think is the way forward. By saying, I want to learn more. And I think this is the only way to fight inequality out there.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank our three speakers for the amazing, not only for their participation today here at our panel discussion, but for the phenomenal work they do in the area of DEI. And I wish you were here to receive the ovation you deserve for all the things you do. Thank you so much. And innovation for your... Thank you.